I'm Chaz. I'm 28 years old. I'm happily married. I'm a lawyer by day, and I've just become a dad.
Didn't end up being a water birth. Through the water, his eyes were open, and it just looked like he was swimming. It was incredible. It was only like hours later when we were finally just alone in the room, me and Anna and baby, and having a cuddle, that it sort of sunk in.
He's so tiny and defenseless, and he's mine to look after. I need to protect him, especially from what happened to me. I was sexually abused as a child. When I was 5, my babysitter would play games with me. Sexualized games. It was our little secret.
You hear all the time that abusers were abused themselves, and I'm terrified that everyone's going to look at me and think, oh, he's going to abuse someone someday.
Whenever we hear of child sexual abuse, it fills us with anger and fear.
The federal government today announced its Royal Commission into the handling of institutional abuse. Accused child molester John Smith walks free. Bring back the death penalty.
We spend so much time talking about punishing offenders, but have you ever asked yourself why it happens in the first place? That's what I want to try and find out. % of women and 4.5% of men are sexually abused before they turn 15. 44% of offenders are a male relative of the victim, and only 11% are a complete stranger. Why do you think someone would abuse a child?
Well, that's a very thorny subject.
Or it might be sick in the head, something, you know.
Somebody that was possibly abused as a child.
Maybe they watch too many horrible movies.
Drink, drugs, broken home.
Oh, I guess it makes me think of like religions that suppress sexuality.
It's hard to say it's both sick and evil.
Survivors of child sexual abuse are everywhere. You probably know one, even if you don't know it. And at some point, we've all asked ourselves, why did it happen to me? My babysitter wasn't a relative, just some young guy who looked after me. So I'm off to meet Deborah Byrne, who was abused by her grandfather.
Deborah?
Nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you.
Come sit outside.
I think I might be like 5 or 6 in this photo. Yeah, kindergarten.
So if you don't mind me asking, how old were you when...
I don't know how young I was,
okay.
But when do you have access to a child? When you're a grandparent? Well, pretty much all the time, whenever you want. And, you know, a pedophile doesn't discriminate. You know, there's no too young.
Was there a point when you realised that it was wrong, or did it always feel wrong?
It didn't always feel wrong, but it started to feel uncomfortable. And there's a particular time where he was pushing my head down, and I'm in a car, in his car. And that had never happened before. And I did get out of the car and I did scream and I ran, you know.
How old were you?
I would have been about 10 then.
10, okay.
Yeah.
When did you tell people?
I told a sister.
Yeah.
And she said, oh, it's happened to all of us, you know.
Right.
And it was that thing of like, oh, you know, some people say, it's just, you know, that's how he shows you he loves you.
Yeah.
You know, I've had family members say that. I've had an auntie say that to me. That's how he shows love.
Why do you think your grandfather showed love in that way?
Let's be very clear, it's not love. But why did he behave that way? He may have been abused as a child. He may have become an abuser due to what he experienced as a child. He may have just been pure evil and selfish and lustful.
I think evil insinuates that the offenders know exactly what they're doing, know exactly the damage that they're going to do, and do it anyway without caring. Do I think abusers are evil? I don't know yet.
Deborah thinks her grandfather may have been abused himself. I hate hearing that. That can't be the only thing that drives people to abuse children. My abuser was a babysitter and Deborah's was a family member. But we all know abuse also happens in institutions. I'm meeting up with Pete Dillon, a former Catholic altar boy who was abused by a priest.
So you still have a faith?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Was your sitter involved with the church?
No.
Okay. That's probably why you still have a faith.
Probably, and it's why I'm interested to talk to you as well.
So it happened at the presbytery, so the home of the priest, which was attached to the school that I went to.
Right.
It happened once actually in the church, and the more I think about that now, the more angry it makes me.
Why does that in particular make you angry?
Well, this is, you know, these men are supposed to be servants of God, and in God's house, they're committing acts that are not moral. Then I think
godly.
That's probably, well, it's certainly not godly now. I think that's the worst part of it for me, that it's not about sex, it's about power.
If it's just about power, why don't you think that's satisfied by, I don't know, telling kids what to do? Or...
And I think it's not just physical, it's emotional, it's psychological, it's mental. And I think anybody who's been a victim will agree that the mental anguish, you know, you lie in bed with your wife or your partner or your whomever at night, and they wonder why you scream in your sleep. I held on to it for 22 years.
Wow.
With not telling anybody. Just, that was my secret shame, I guess.
I'm in Sydney to meet retired Catholic Bishop Geoffrey Robinson. The bishop is known to have some pretty progressive views on what causes clerical abuse. I want to know what a guy on the inside thinks.
I think obligatory celibacy for priests is a contributing factor. It's not the sole cause. Somehow celibacy said they mustn't have a relationship with an adult woman, and that somehow offending with a boy was therefore not as great a wrong. I mean, you know, horribly distorted thinking. I believe the fact that in the Catholic Church women are largely excluded is another factor.
Do you think that people who sexually abuse children are evil?
Well, I'm in a similar position. I was abused too, as a young person, as a young teenager. I'm very slow to use the word evil of a whole person. What they're doing is evil. The harm caused to the minors is massive and lifelong. Sometimes they might be not aware of all of that.
How do you feel about incidences of churches covering up abuse?
Well, obviously that's wrong. I mean, I've been fighting that for years. And it is a mistake to think it's all the Catholic Church, let's get rid of that and we've solved the problem. We haven't. It's everywhere, as you and I can testify.
To me, any covering up of abuse by a church is ungodly. It's almost as bad as the abuse itself.
I don't associate the evil acts of one person to be representative of God or representative of the church. I have a faith, and knowing that priests abuse children doesn't shake my faith in God, it shakes my faith in priests.
The survivors I've met have their own theories on why they were abused, but none of us have confronted our abuser to ask why. Why did you do it? I've come to meet someone who has. Kate was sexually abused by her father. She and her mother were supported by a rehabilitation program that allowed them to speak to Kate's dad, but on their terms.
I would have been 2 or 3, and then it kept going in until I was 10, I think. Then he started to realise I was catching on, that it was wrong, so then he started trying to develop new tactics.
When it was happening to me, I didn't feel like anything wrong was happening. It was just kind of, I don't know, part of life, I guess. So did you feel the same way?
It just felt normal to me, and I was, because of the grooming, I felt like it was okay because I was getting praised for it. So, and of course, because of that, I thought, oh, okay, this is really good. I mean, my dad loves me because of this. But obviously it wasn't when I grew older to understand that it was wrong.
What impact did this have on your family?
It's a simple question for something that's so complex. My daughter suffered from self-harm, suicidal thoughts, and it's hard because you can't tell people. In fact, I've had people not want to speak to me because they felt that it was our fault. I mean, I've been told, I'm a bad mother. I've been told, well, you should have known, or why didn't you do something sexually for him? And it's just like, that really wasn't the cause of it whatsoever. So we start blaming ourselves. Why did they do that? How did they do that? How could I not have seen?
Do you guys think of him as evil?
I certainly believe that nobody can be born evil. By saying people are evil and sick, you're actually giving them an excuse to do it.
Through this process, do you have any idea why he did it?
He has given me quite a large list of why he did it. Mind you, no matter what he'll say, to me that's an excuse and not a reason.
Mary has given me a statement from Kate's dad explaining why he thinks he did what he did to his daughter.
I have been a very selfish and self-centered person who only did things for my own gain. I held a belief that nobody cared for me, so I must care for myself. I grew up thinking that my father did not care for me, as I did not see him actively involved in my life. I learned that the father of the family did whatever he wanted. From this, I developed a belief that everything was mine for my own use, even other people. I don't understand from this how he could have abused his daughter.
Kate's father completed a treatment program for adults who have sexually abused their own child. He lives in the community and has agreed to speak to me. I'm about to face a man who abused his own kid.
Did the treatment help you understand why you offended in the first place?
I always had an understanding of why, and that was simply because I wanted to. What the treatment allowed me to do was to go back and work out why I wanted to. See, I don't think it's anything intrinsic or anything, wired into a man. It is something that they develop over time. I think for me, the driving factor was the thrill of doing something that was wrong and getting away with it.
At that point in your life, you couldn't have satisfied that want any other way? Like stealing cars, for example.
Yeah. Okay, with your example, stealing cars,
a lot of evidence is left behind. Whereas child sexual assault, it's usually the victim against the perpetrator when it comes to evidence.
Was your sexualisation of all children, or was it just your daughter?
It was primarily my daughter, and when she was getting older, you know, also her friends.
Were you aware that you might be harming your daughter?
At the time, I would tell myself that if she didn't remember it, it wouldn't hurt her.
And how old was she when you stopped?
She was about 11 years old.
And you didn't think she would remember even though she was that age?
I think all throughout, I knew that they would impact, but because of my selfishness, I didn't consider them. It's a compound of people wanting more. You know, they want their sexual exploits to look younger. And, you know, they want them to appear more innocent. And for me, it was the progression through regular porn to, you know, young adult porn to, you know, young adults dressed up as school kids, through to the child pornography, and then eventually to, you know, wanting to do it myself.
Do you feel that those thought patterns are now gone as a result of the treatment?
Well, I haven't allowed myself to get in a situation where they can crop up. For example, I'll avoid going anywhere where there may be school children. If I get on a train and there's a child, I'll get off the train again.
Do you think your daughter feels safe with you?
I have very strict guidelines with respect to her, so I don't want to have her in a situation where she doesn't feel that she's safe.
Do you still sexualise your daughter now?
No, I don't.
How are you feeling?
I just... He was chasing a thrill. Like driving your car too fast, or, you know, the way we all push boundaries, but with him it was just something so awful. And what scares me is that he said that developed, that wasn't in him innately, you know, it was something about our society and the way that he fit into that society that developed and that happened. You know, that he knew it was wrong and did it anyway, that he knew it was going to have an impact and he did it anyway. What kind of person does that?
Meeting John has brought back memories of my own abuser. What scares me is if that instinct developed in John, if what he says is true, could it develop in any of us?
We're off to see a guy called Dale Tolliday, and he treats people like John, rehabilitates them, and frankly, I'm glad, because after yesterday, I kind of just want to... I have a lot of questions. Do you think they know that it's wrong?
Yes.
Do you find that hard to deal with?
Not really, because I'm quite used now to looking together with the men at how they made exceptions to the rules. This is part of what they have as their reality, and the reality they're trying to live within.
What do you think motivates offenders?
There are some commonalities and general themes that we look at when people are identified, such as loneliness, incapacity or limited capacity to relate to people in intimate ways, paired with access and availability with children. The first thing that sort of stands out is it's predominantly men.
Yeah.
Reports seem to indicate it's about 3% of the whole being women.
Right.
My view is it's predominantly socially created and it's developmentally influenced by what the men have experienced in their upbringing. So exposure to domestic violence, experience of severe physical discipline when they were children.
I talked to a family and perpetrator themselves who've gone through a rehabilitation process, and this particular offender said that the main motivating factor for him to offend was the thrill of doing something forbidden.
I'm sure that was part of it, and there certainly is a part of the behaviour that's sexualised, and it includes sex, that creates a thrill. For the people that sexually abuse children, rather than looking at what drives it, we'll also look at what's not happening. And what's not happening, he's not seeing the pain he's inflicting, not seeing the harm in the child, is seeing the child perhaps as something less than a person. This is part of what we invite the men to start thinking about more deeply.
There's a common perception that anyone who abuses were themselves abused when they were a kid.
Girls are more likely to be abused than boys, and girls overwhelmingly don't carry this behaviour forward. So when people ask the question about whether people are abused are likely to abuse sexually, they're actually talking about the boys who are abused and whether the boys will abuse again. The vast majority of boys abused don't abuse again.
One of the reasons I'm doing this is I want to know how many people who were abused go on to be abusers. Fearing for myself, I guess. I'm no longer afraid for myself. I'm not like John. I do not have that perception of reality. So I woke up this morning, and when that thought struck me, it was kind of a weight off my shoulders. I can walk around and say I was abused, and it means nothing other than I was abused.
While I am relieved, I still want to know what can be done to help prevent abuse in the first place. Like Dale Tolliday, Dr. Peter Powell treats convicted offenders, but he's also one of the few psychologists encouraging men to come forward before they act on their urges.
So paedophilia, by psychological definition, is someone whose priority of orientation is towards children.
Okay.
In fact, most sex offenders are not pedophiles. Most sex offenders are someone who would prefer an adult relationship, but then they'll act out with a child if they get the opportunity. But I work with pedophiles who know they're pedophiles, that's their orientation, but they also feel strongly it's wrong and they don't want to act that way, so they come for treatment having never offended.
So how many pre-offending pedophiles have you treated?
Just 2 at this stage, but I've got to say that to bring that out and to want to work on it a long time is very, very painful.
What do you think needs to change so that more pedophiles who haven't offended seek help?
Well, we'd have to change the attitude and language in the community, wouldn't you? You'd have to say that if you vilify people, you drive them underground, you also take away their desire to be honest and accountable.
I'd heard that he'd been treating pre-offenders and thought, oh, great, this exists, it's out there, and then to hear that it's only done 2, we need to do better.
Each year, thousands of incidences of child sexual abuse are recorded across Australia. With so few pedophiles seeking help before they offend, I want to know how we can stop convicted offenders from doing it again.
There's been a lot of research over the last decade or more that shows that people that have gone through specific treatment programs are at a reduced rate of reoffending compared to people who haven't been through treatment programs.
What are the rates?
The rates for treated offenders are normally below 10%. Essentially, it's about changing patterns of thinking and changing patterns of behaviour that have been associated with offending. So they might have told themselves that the child was coming on to them. So they might have misinterpreted the child's behaviour in a sexual way. So when it comes to treatment, part of what we do is help them to understand that actually, no, that's not what was happening, that's what you were telling yourself in your head. We try and reinforce the appropriate sexual fantasies that they have.
Is paedophilia a sexual orientation?
That's a really interesting question, and one that has really big implications for how we work with these people. There's been a few studies recently that have actually made that suggestion that paedophilia might be an age-oriented sexual orientation rather than a gender-oriented sexual orientation. And we've seen that people that have paedophilia develop that attraction to children around the same age as people that develop a gender-oriented sexual orientation. So it's going to be really important that that person learns strategies to manage his attraction to children and keep himself and other people safe.
So why don't we just lock them up and throw away the key?
Because imprisonment is really expensive, and that money can be better spent on actually trying to prevent sexual abuse from happening in the first place, and for victim services. The majority of men will be released back into the community. The safest sex offender is someone who has a place to live, who has family and friends to who he can be accountable to, who has work, and who has everything to lose by repeating a sexual assault.
Even though I get that offenders who've been through treatment are probably less likely to reoffend, I still wouldn't want one moving in next door. But if the most common abuser is a family member or a close friend, how else do we protect our kids?
Hi everybody, I'm going to read you a really special story today. It's called Some Secrets Should Never Be Kept.
I've come to meet a primary school teacher who's found a way to teach kids about this issue.
This is the biggest misconception, is that when we talk to kids about body safety, that we're going to talk to them about sex. Well, we're not. When we teach them road safety, when we teach them water safety, we don't show them graphic images. Simply put, it's your body, no one has the right to touch it, and if they do, you must tell straight away until someone believes you. When I was on my children's school council, I brought up the topic of sexual abuse prevention education for children, and every time I brought it up at school council, I was put to the bottom of the agenda. So I decided I would write a book that parents could use as a tool to broach the subject of teaching their kids about what I call body safety. You are the bravest little knight I have ever known, she said. And what Lord Henry did to you was very wrong.
Has there been any fear from parents in reacting against this book?
Oh yeah, parents just think it's never ever going to happen to their child. So it's their fear, adults' fear of this topic, that puts their children at risk.
I didn't tell my mum. I didn't think what had happened to me was wrong at all. So if that book had been around when I was little, then maybe I would have known it was wrong. Maybe I would have told my mum way back then. Maybe it would have stopped sooner, and maybe the offender would have been reported and something happened to him.
Okay. 1, 2.
Want it?
Oh, maybe.
First picnic.
With so many people affected by sexual abuse,
Exciting.
it still amazes me that we talk so little about why people do it. We seem more wrapped up in punishing offenders than figuring out how to try and stop them from doing it in the first place.
I don't think I'll ever understand why my babysitter abused me. And I don't think many of us ever know why it happened to us.
Clearly the reasons are complex, and for many survivors, they're not reasons at all. I'm pretty sure my babysitter knew what he was doing was wrong. I just wish he'd stopped himself, or that someone had stopped him. One day, I'll talk to my son about this stuff. Sure, it's scary and confronting, but avoiding it won't keep him safe.